Our trip to France, for me, really begins with my mother on the Queen Elizabeth. Not the QE2, but the real one, the first Queen Elizabeth, which was the most spectacular ship you could ever imagine. All the staterooms were walnut paneled, the stewards were impeccable, the food was, well, indescribable. And we were in first class, which meant that my mother and my father had to dress every night. Few kids get to see their parents dressed to the nines every single night for 5 days. Black tie and gowns. And it was like a whole new look at who my parents were. Then, well, I can skip that part, because then we arrived. I can remember that. I had this glamorous set of parents. My sister was her usual self. And we arrived at the port of Cherbourg, and we set forth into the country that was involved in the D-Day invasion. So we had a rented car, and we drove to a little bistro that had like 2 tables, where we relied on my mother to order us coq au vin, which was outstanding, except that my sister and I did like the bones. Then we went on to our luxurious apartment in Neuilly, which was one of the privileged suburbs of Paris. Beautiful, high-level apartment, well, 3rd level anyway, and discovered the limitations of life in Paris. We had a refrigerator that was the size of just a box, and a stove that had like 2 burners. And this is one of the most prestigious apartments in Paris. Okay. The next day was my birthday. My mother dutifully went out and hunted down a birthday cake for me, which was sort of like a fruit cake in 4 layers. We all stared at it, cut it, ate it. Well, a piece of it anyway. Saying, ew. And then life in Paris began. Now, my dad had a lot of work to do because he was working with a bunch of French engineers who did not know anything about anything, which was his big concern. And my mother, okay, now the clock is set. We've got like 2 months, 60 days, in which she is going to like run Susie and me through Paris, come what may, and everything around Paris. So in the course of that 60 days, my mother took us to the sewers, where we rode a boat, not knowing where it was going to end. She took us to the catacombs, where we saw stacks and stacks and stacks of skulls and like tunnels without ends. Like, you turn here, skulls, turn there, skulls, turn there, skulls. She also took us to museums, the Jeu de Paume, where we saw all the great French impressionists. She took us to Malmaison, where Napoleon lived with Josephine, and we saw the fact that they had the first working shower in the post-revolutionary world. They captured rainwater in the top in a copper bin, and it like trickled down. It's like you turned a thing, it's like boom, it's like, and it was a small house. It's like they were actually a couple. Okay. And we went to Versailles, where you saw great halls and amazing, well, mirrors and columns. And I was just 10, so what did I remember? I remembered what they called the golden carp, which are actually goldfish who had been allowed to live for like 80 years. And they were like 2 feet long. So it's like, okay. Then she took us on a subway to every single kind of place she could think of to show us what people in France really lived like, including Montmartre, where we saw the painters painting. My dad would come home. We would have dinner, which was like usually bad, because the problem was that my mother was used to like living in America, where you could go to the supermarket and put a whole bunch of food in the cart and bring it home and then put it together and make a meal of it. In France, we had this thing we had to do every single day, which was they had this little green net bag. And everybody had this little green net bag. And you would go to supermarché, which was the French word for supermarket, obviously. And you would buy what you needed for today, because your little box of a refrigerator, which is like the size of a Holiday Inn safe, could hold it. And you had to figure out what you were going to do with it. And this is actually a trick that's hard to acquire. But what we did get every day was we stopped outside the supermarché and we got an ice cream cone. Well, that's not an ice cream cone, really. They had 2 flavors. They had vanille and they had fraise, which was raspberry. Cones. Or one treat. Then when my father came home, we could like do more exotic things. We could go visit, as we did, the great cafes on the Champs-Élysées and in the backwaters, because he knew what they were too. We went to the Cafe Deux Magots, which means 2 maggots. I always ordered the same thing, which was a Coca-Cola. And the waiter always delivered it the same way. He would like put the bottle between his legs and like snap the cap and say, shh, that's okay. We went to a place called Aux Cinq Pains d'Orge, which was a place that was famous chiefly for, well, hors d'oeuvres. You would get like 5 hors d'oeuvres, and that was your dinner. Terrific. There was also, well, just the Champs-Élysées itself. The most incredibly beautiful street you've ever seen in your life. And the trees on either side is like wide enough to allow Charles de Gaulle to have a victory march on it. And it turned out that 4 days after my birthday, Charles de Gaulle did have a victory march on it, and I almost got to see him. And I say, if I were a liar, I would tell you I saw him. I didn't. My dad actually bought one of those boxes with like the 2 mirrors, so he could hold me on his shoulders, and I could like see him, and I couldn't see him. So he went by. This is when they were all trying to kill him. And there was a bombing there, like the first week that we were there, when they were trying to kill him. Meanwhile, my mother is still like taking us here, there, and everywhere. What are you trying to do? Just stop.